The salt-tinged breeze carried the scent of fresh bread through the open windows of Thorne's bakery, where 19-year-old Alara dusted flour from her apron as the last customer of the day departed. Her dark hair fell in gentle waves around. Her shoulders and her green eyes sparkled with the kind of hope that only youth could harbor. She had no idea that this ordinary Tuesday evening would shatter her world forever. Ilara. The familiar voice made her heart skip as she turned to find Damien standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the dying sunlight. Even after 6 months of secret meetings, the sight of him still made her breath catch. His dark hair was disheveled from the ocean wind, and those piercing blue eyes held an intensity that both thrilled and worried her. "You're early," she whispered, glancing toward the stairs where her parents' voices drifted down. "They're still awake." Damien crossed the bakery in quick strides, pulling her into his arms before she could protest. His lips found hers in a desperate kiss that tasted of longing and something else, something that felt dangerously like goodbye. When they broke apart, she searched his face, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly as they framed her face. "Meet me at our place," he murmured against her forehead. "I need to talk to you." An hour later, Alara slipped through the shadows to their secret sanctuary, the abandoned lighthouse that overlooked the harbor. Damien was already there, pacing like a caged animal. The moonlight streaming through the broken windows cast silver patterns across his face, highlighting the anguish in his expression. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words torn from his throat. "God help me, Alara. I love you more than my own life." She went to him then, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "And I love you. Nothing else matters, Damien. Not your family's expectations, not the differences in our stations. It does matter." He caught her hands, his grip almost painful. "My family, they've discovered our relationship. And my debts." His voice cracked. "I owe more money than I can ever repay." Ilara's heart began to race. "We'll figure it out. We can leave this place, start fresh somewhere. I've arranged something." The words came out in a rush, as if he couldn't bear to hold them back any longer. "Theodore Blackwood, the textile merchant from the capital. He's agreed to clear my debts in exchange for—" The world tilted on its axis. "In exchange for what, Damien?" His silence was answer enough. Ilara staggered backward, her hand flying to her throat. "No, you couldn't have. You wouldn't. He'll marry you, give you a comfortable life. You'll want for nothing, except love." The words exploded from her lips. "Except choice. You've sold me like cattle." Damien's face crumpled. "I had no choice. They threatened to destroy your family's business, to ruin everyone you care about. This was the only way. Get out." Her voice was deadly quiet now, more terrifying than her screams had been. "Get out before I do something we'll both regret." Ilara. "Please, get out!" As his footsteps faded into the night, Ilara collapsed to her knees on the cold lighthouse floor. The girl who had loved so completely, so trustingly, died that night. What would rise from her ashes would be something far more dangerous than Damien could ever imagine. The marble floors of Ilara's penthouse office gleamed under the late afternoon sun, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city's financial district. 5 years had transformed the broken girl from the lighthouse into something entirely different, something harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. "Ms. Thorne, the Henderson contract needs your signature," her assistant announced, placing the documents on the mahogany desk where Ilara sat reviewing quarterly reports. The name felt foreign on her lips sometimes. She'd legally changed it after escaping Blackwood's suffocating mansion, shedding her past like a snake sheds its skin. Ilara signed with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and controlled. Everything about her now was deliberate. From the way she wore her dark hair in an elegant chignon to the tailored burgundy suit that commanded respect in every boardroom. The scared 19-year-old who once kneaded bread with flour-dusted hands was buried so deep that sometimes even she forgot she had existed. The memories still came at night, though. How she'd endured 3 hellish months as Blackwood's wife before discovering his shipping connections to less savory enterprises. She documented everything, then used that information as leverage for her freedom and start-up capital for her first restaurant. Blackwood never came after her. He couldn't afford to have his business dealings exposed. There's also this, her assistant continued, hesitating. A message from an old contact in your hometown. Alara's pen stilled. 5 years, and she'd never looked back. What kind of message? Apparently, Damien Ashford has lost everything. His family disowned him after some scandal involving forged documents and embezzled funds. He's been asking around town about you. The pen snapped in Alara's grip. She stared at the broken pieces, black ink staining her fingers like the darkness that had never quite left her heart. I see. File it away. But alone in her penthouse that night, Ilara stood before the massive windows wearing nothing but silk, pajamas, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. The city sparkled below like a constellation of possibilities, each light representing the empire she'd built through sheer will and ruthless determination. She'd had lovers since Blackwood, powerful, men who saw her as a conquest, gentle souls who tried to reach the wounded girl beneath her armor. None had succeeded in touching the part of her that remained frozen in that lighthouse, the part that remembered what it felt like to love someone completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from her current companion, Richard Grayson, a senator's son who took her to charity galas and warmed her bed with practiced efficiency. Dinner tomorrow? That new French place on 5th? She deleted it without responding. Richard was handsome, successful, and utterly forgettable. He touched her body but never her soul, which was exactly how she preferred it. Love was a luxury she could no longer afford. It had cost her too much the first time. Moving to her home office, Ilara pulled up the files on her latest acquisition, a chain of failing restaurants she planned to renovate and flip. Her business model was simple. Take something broken, rebuild it stronger, and never let sentiment interfere with profit. She'd applied the same principle to herself. The girl who'd once dreamed of simple happiness, a small bakery, children playing in a garden, a husband who came home to her arms each night, was gone. In her place stood a woman who owned 12 restaurants, 3 hotels, and enough real estate to house a small city. She employed hundreds, donated millions to causes supporting women's independence, and slept alone in silk sheets that cost more than most people made in a month. As she worked late into the night, Ilara caught her reflection in the dark window. Sometimes she wondered if this version of herself was who she was always meant to become, or if she was just another casualty of Damien's betrayal, a success story built on the grave of innocence. The broken girl was gone, but the phoenix that had risen from her ashes carried scars that no amount of power or wealth could heal. And somewhere in the depths of her protected heart, a small voice whispered that perhaps that was exactly what she deserved. The grand opening of Ilara's flagship restaurant, Phoenix, was the social event of the season. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the elegant dining room where the city's elite mingled, champagne glasses clinking in celebration of her latest triumph. Ilara moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, her midnight blue gown hugging her curves while diamonds sparkled at her throat, armor disguised as jewelry. Absolutely magnificent, darling, gushed Margaret Whitmore, the mayor's wife. You've outdone yourself this time. Ilara smiled the practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Thank you. I believe in creating experiences that leave lasting impressions. As she spoke, her gaze swept the room, cataloging every detail with the precision that had made her empire possible. The waitstaff moved with choreographed efficiency. Her managers handled any issues seamlessly, and the kitchen ran like clockwork. Everything was perfect until she saw him. He was carrying a tray of champagne flutes, dressed in the standard black vest and white shirt of her serving staff. But even in humble attire, even with his face leaner and marked by hardship, she would have recognized those blue eyes anywhere. Time seemed to fracture as their gazes met across the crowded room. Damien's step faltered, champagne glasses trembling on his tray. 8 years collapsed into nothing. She was 19 again, breathless and desperate, while he looked at her with the same mixture of love and anguish that had haunted her dreams. "Excuse me," Ilara murmured to Margaret, her voice remarkably steady. She walked toward him with measured steps, each footfall echoing like a countdown to detonation. "Miss Thorne," he said quietly when she reached him, his voice rougher than she remembered. "Congratulations on your success. My office. Now." The words were barely above a whisper, but her tone could have cut glass. 20 minutes later, after she'd made her excuses to the guests and ensured the evening would continue flawlessly. Without her, Ilara closed the door of her private office with deliberate calm. Damien stood near the window, his back to her, shoulders tense with the weight of years and regret. "You have some nerve," she said, circling to face him. Up close, she could see how life had carved new lines around his eyes, how his once pampered hands now bore calluses. "Coming here, working for me under false pretenses." "I didn't lie about my qualifications. I've been working in restaurants for 3 years. His voice was steady, but she caught the tremor underneath. "I needed the job, Ilara. I have debts." "Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare use my name like we're old friends." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "What should I call you then? Your Majesty? Ms. Thorne?" His composure cracked, revealing a flash of the passionate man she'd once known. "You've built quite an empire on the ashes of our past." "Our past?" Ilara laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "We had no past, Damien. You made sure of that when you sold me like livestock. I was 23 and terrified. You were a coward who chose money over love." She moved closer, close enough to smell his familiar scent beneath the starch of his uniform. "Tell me, was it worth it? The 30 pieces of silver you got for betraying me?" His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Every day for 8 years. I've lived with what I did. Every night I see your face when you realized what I'd done. Do you think that was easy? Do you think I don't hate myself?" "Good." The word dropped between them like a stone. "You should hate yourself." They stood frozen, the air crackling with tension and unresolved desire. Despite everything, the betrayal, the years, the walls she'd built, being this close to him still made her pulse race. She hated herself for it, hated the part of her that remembered his touch, his kiss, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer. "I'll give you a choice," she said finally, stepping back before she did something foolish. "You can leave now, tonight, and never contact me again. Or you can stay and work for me, but understand this. You'll be nothing more than an employee. You'll follow my orders, accept my terms, and if you ever presume on our history, I'll destroy you so completely that even your creditors will pity you." Damien's jaw tightened. "And if I stay?" "Then you'll learn what it means to be owned by someone who holds all the power." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "Consider it educational." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and peril. Finally, Damien straightened his shoulders, and for a moment, she glimpsed the pride that had once made her fall so hard for him. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "But understand this, Ilara. I'm not the same man who betrayed you, and you're not the same innocent girl I fell in love with. Maybe it's time we both found out who we really are." 3 months of employment had settled into a routine of exquisite torture. Damien worked the morning shift at Phoenix, arriving before dawn to prep vegetables and staying until the lunch rush ended. Ilara made sure their paths crossed regularly, a deliberate psychological warfare that kept them both on edge. "Table 12 wants to send their compliments to the chef," Damien reported, standing in the doorway of her office where she reviewed inventory reports. The sight of him in his chef's whites, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, sent an unwelcome heat through her body. "Tell them Chef Martinez appreciates the feedback," she replied without looking up. "They specifically asked to thank the owner." Ilara's pen stilled. "Then you can tell them the owner is busy." Damien stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "You can't avoid every customer who wants to meet you. It's bad for business. Don't tell me how to run my restaurant." She finally looked up, caught off guard by how close he'd gotten. He stood beside her desk, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "Your restaurant where I'm apparently indispensable," he said quietly. "Martinez told me you've refused 3 applicants for head sous chef, all more qualified than me." Ilara stood abruptly, intending to put distance between them, but he didn't step back. They were inches apart now, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the intoxicating mixture of kitchen spices and his skin. "Maybe I enjoy watching you sweat in my kitchen," she said, her voice huskier than intended. "Is that what this is about? Revenge?" His hand came up to rest on the desk beside her hip, not touching, but trapping her. "Because if you want to make me suffer, Ilara, there are more efficient ways." "Such as?" The question hung between them, loaded with 8 years of suppressed desire. Damien's eyes dropped to her lips, and she saw his control wavering. "Such as this," he whispered, leaning closer until their breaths mingled. For a heartbeat, Ilara felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by the magnetic pull that had never truly died. Then sanity crashed back, and she placed her palm flat against his chest, stopping him. "Get back to work," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "And close the door behind you." But that evening, Ilara found herself in the restaurant's wine cellar, supposedly conducting inventory, but actually trying to escape the memory of how warm his skin had felt beneath her palm. The cellar was quiet, insulated from the dinner crowd above, lined with racks of bottles that represented years of careful curation. "Working late again?" Damien's voice came from the cellar entrance. She didn't turn around. "The lunch shift ended hours ago. What are you still doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing." His footsteps echoed on the stone floor as he descended. "Though I think I know the answer." "Enlighten me." "You're running from the same thing I am." This time she did turn, finding him halfway down the stairs, still in his work clothes but with his sleeves rolled down and collar loosened. In the dim cellar lighting, he looked dangerous, all shadows and sharp angles. "I don't run from anything," she said. "No?" He reached the bottom of the stairs, moving toward her with predatory grace. "Then why are you hiding down here instead of enjoying the success upstairs?" "I'm not hiding." The lie died on her lips as he backed her against the wine rack, his hands bracing on either side of her head. Bottles clinked softly as her back pressed against the wooden shelving. 8 years, he said, his voice rough with longing. 8 years I've regretted every moment of that night. 8 years I've wondered what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to run away with you instead. But you weren't brave, she whispered, even as her traitorous body responded to his proximity. You sold me to save yourself. Yes, the admission tore from his throat. And I've paid for it every day since. But Ilara, what we had, it wasn't fake. What I felt for you wasn't a lie. His hand came up to trace her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. And despite every wall she'd built, every lesson she'd learned, Ilara felt herself melting. don't, she breathed, but made no move to stop him. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he continued, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. I know I have no right to touch you, to want you, to dream about what we could have been. But God, help me. I can't stop. When he kissed her, it was like a dam bursting. 8 years of suppressed longing, rage, and desperate need crashed over them both. Ilara's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed warnings. He tasted like memory and regret, like the boy she'd loved and the man she'd learned to hate. They broke apart gasping, both trembling with the force of emotions too long denied. "This changes nothing," Ilara said, her voice shaking. "I know," he replied, but his eyes said otherwise. As they stood there in the wine cellar's shadows, surrounded by vintage bottles that had aged into something complex and potent, both knew they were standing on the precipice of something that would either heal them or destroy them completely. The crisis came on a Tuesday morning when Ilara's biggest investor, Victoria Lansing, called an emergency meeting. The woman who controlled 40% of Ilara's restaurant empire sat across from her in the penthouse office, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun and her expression colder than winter. "The Riverside Hotel project is bleeding money," Victoria said without preamble. "Unless you can turn it around in 30 days, I'm pulling my backing from all your ventures." Ilara's blood chilled. The Riverside was her most ambitious project, a luxury hotel and restaurant complex that would cement her position as the city's hospitality queen. But construction delays and permit issues had pushed them months behind schedule and millions over budget. 30 days isn't realistic for a project of this scope. 30 days or I liquidate everything. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. "I'm sure you'll find a way. You always have before." After Victoria left, Ilara sat alone in her office, staring at the architectural plans spread across her desk. Everything she'd built, every sacrifice she'd made, hung in the balance. She needed a miracle, or at least someone who understood construction management and had connections in the permit office. Someone like Damien, who'd worked construction during his lean years and had maintained relationships throughout the industry. 3. Hours later, they stood together in the skeletal frame of what would become the Riverside's signature restaurant, hard hats reflecting the afternoon sun streaming through missing windows. Damien studied the blueprints while Ilara watched him work, noting how his confidence had grown over the months he'd worked for her. "The delay is here," he said, pointing to the kitchen specifications. "The commercial-grade ventilation system you ordered requires environmental impact reviews that weren't filed. But if we modify the design slightly..." His finger traced an alternative layout. "We can use standard systems and cut 6 weeks off the timeline. That would compromise the signature features. Not if we get creative." He looked up, his eyes bright with the kind of innovative thinking that had once made her believe he could conquer the world. "Trust me on this." The word trust hung between them, weighted with history. Ilara studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, but found only earnest determination. "If this fails, it won't," he said firmly. "Let me help you, Ilara. Let me prove that I can do more than just follow orders." Over the following weeks, they worked 18-hour days, coordinating contractors, expediting permits, and troubleshooting problems as they arose. The professional partnership rekindled something between them, not the innocent love of their youth, but something deeper, more complex. They were equals now, both hardened by life, both carrying scars, but choosing to trust despite the risk. It was past midnight when they finally stood in the completed restaurant, exhausted but triumphant. The space was breathtaking, soaring ceilings, panoramic river views, and an open kitchen that would make every meal a performance. "We did it," Ilara breathed, hardly believing they'd met Victoria's deadline. "You did it," Damien corrected, standing, close enough that she could see her reflection in his eyes. I just helped. Don't minimize your contribution. She turned to face him fully, her heart hammering. I couldn't have saved this without you. Ilara. He reached out, his fingers ghosting over her cheek. There's something I need to tell. You. About why I really came to work for you. Her stomach clenched. What? I've been using my connections to help other women. Women in situations like you were in with Blackwood. I've helped them disappear, find new identities, start over. His voice was quiet, intense. That's where my money goes. That's why I'll never be wealthy again. Because I'm trying to atone for what I did to you. The confession hit her like a physical blow. All this time, while she'd been playing power games and testing his loyalty, he'd been quietly working to right the wrongs of men like himself. Why didn't you tell me? Because it doesn't erase what I did. Nothing can. He stepped closer, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. But I needed you to know that the man who betrayed you is gone. What's left is someone who loves you enough to let you decide what happens next. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like their desperate encounter in the wine cellar. This was deliberate, reverent, a claiming and a surrender all at once. When they broke apart, Ilara saw her future reflected in his eyes. Not the fairy tale she'd dreamed of at 19, but something real and complicated and worth fighting for. Later, in the privacy of his small apartment above a downtown deli, they made love with the intensity of people who'd found each other after years of wandering in the dark. Ilara had never allowed herself to be truly vulnerable with anyone since that night in the lighthouse. But with Damien, the walls came down, piece by piece. I need you to understand something, she whispered afterward, lying in his arms as dawn painted the sky pink through his window. I'm not the same person I was. I can't be owned, controlled, or manipulated. If we do this, if we try again, it has to be as equals. I wouldn't want it any other way, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. The girl I fell in love with was sweet and trusting. The woman I love now is fierce and strong. I'd rather have your respect than your submission. Ilara smiled against his chest, feeling something that had been frozen inside her for 8 years finally begin to thaw. Love, she realized, didn't have to make you weak. Sometimes, with the right person, it could make you invincible. 6 months later, they stood together on the lighthouse where it all began, not as a broken girl and her betrayer, but as two people who'd learned that sometimes the greatest love stories are about finding your way back to each other, stronger and wiser than before.